Entrenched Echoes by Oceanair 12. Chapter 8, Cold Light. Quick reader's notes before we get into it. Sorry if the audio's different sounding. I couldn't handle the garage anymore because it was so hot, and that's where I've been recording the whole time. So, if the audio sounds different, it's a different location. Sorry. Anyway, back to the chapter. Hyrule had been digging through his bag while everyone else took care of Shadrule's, terrible name, but he preferred it to the real one, lackeys. He had a plan. It was not the best plan, but it had worked before. Why wouldn't it work again? But he needed 3 things to do it properly. First, a lot of energy, hence the 2 magic potions Hyrule pulled out of his bag. Usually he was confident in his own magic levels, but this spell, if he ran out of magic, then there'd be a problem. Last time Hyrule was lucky, he hadn't passed out until after the spell was completed, and that had been with help. Second, a conduit, specifically for dark magic. That was the current issue because Hyrule didn't exactly own anything that had dark magic. He was sure someone else had something, but they were a bit busy at the moment. He could maybe just use a magical weapon, like his fire rod, but who knew if it possessed that kind of magic that would interfere? The idea came from the 2 deaths of Shadrule's minions. They weren't exactly weapons, but it was something Hyrule could hold. And lastly, a knife. That was buried in the bottom of his bag. Hyrule finally grasped the handle and pulled it out. He looked a little rusty, but Hyrule didn't really have a choice. He stood up and faced the current situation in the room. Shadrule was now glowing with a dark aura, and no one looked thrilled about finding him. The blue 4's arm was dangling uselessly, Twilight's head was bleeding, time was favoring his right side, and Warriors had switched his sword to his right hand. Everyone else was covered in various scratches and bruises. Frankly, it was a miracle they'd survived this long. Shadow glanced at Hyrule. Hyrule gave him a stiff nod and motioned for him to back away from Shadrule. Shadow barked out, "Back off, Shadrule." "That is not my name. Does it look like I care?" Shadrule growled, lunged at Shadow, who caught his strike and pushed him back. Hyrule took a deep breath. He needed to remember these words exactly or this wouldn't work. He began to mumble the words, feeling his magic inside begin to burn away. It was exhausting. Hyrule barely registered that everyone was still fighting Shadrule. Jab, stab, down went Red 4 with a nasty stab through the arm. Slice, snap, Wild broke a literal stick over Shadrule's head before jumping back and shooting him with multiple arrows in the blink of an eye. Curse, heal, Legend closed up Twilight's gash with a potion. Hyrule finished the first half of his spell and downed his first magic potion. His body felt buzzy with the magic energy, but Hyrule was still exhausted. Now for the rest. Hyrule took a deep breath and stretched his arms and legs quickly. Then he charged into the fray, narrowly avoiding the arrows and dark blasts shot his way. Whether on purpose or accidental, several people shouted in surprise as Hyrule dove straight into the goo that used to be Warrior's shadow. Sure enough, it radiated dark magic. The dive covered most of Hyrule's clothes and his hands, along with part of his face. Even his weapons had been drenched in it. Well, he had gotten what he wanted. He turned and dove into the main fight, barely avoiding a swipe from the Master Sword. Twilight yelped in pain as he dropped the sword. Hyrule mentally apologized, before coming to face with the darkness. Hyrule drew his knife and met his dark self's eyes. Shadrule looked amused. "Aw, what's the little fairy going to do with his little knife?" Hyrule faltered, but only for a moment. He took a deep breath and gave his Dark Link a hard look. I know I can beat you." Shadrule's expression shifted from amused to a sneer. "And you just realized that?" Hyrule reached out and put a hand on Shadrule's shoulder. Shadrule was too surprised to yank back. Hyrule smiled sadly. "So, I'm going to do the only thing I'm good for." Confusion flooded Shadrule's face before turning into understanding, followed by a flash of panic. He had time to say, "Wait!" before Hyrule stabbed his knife through his own left hand and into Shadrule's shoulder. The magic in Hyrule's body flared to life as the darkness screamed, yanking back from the stab wound, but it was too late. Hyrule pulled the knife free of his hand, ignoring the shouts behind him and raising the knife up in the air. It was covered in a mix of red and black blood, bonded by the black goo, all that Hyrule needed to finish the spell. Shadril tried to charge at Hyrule, but he was intercepted by Shadow and the Purple Four, who held him back as Hyrule began the last part of his spell. He didn't worry about messing up the words this time. These particular words haunted his dreams every night. Demon made of hate and malice, forever to be sealed in silence. Shadril screamed loudly, throwing Shadow and the Purple Four away. He charged again, only to be met with Legend and Twilight, Master Sword once again in the latter's hand. Hyrule's knife floated out of his hand so that it was now hovering above Hyrule's head in outstretched hands. Through the joining of dark and night, forever to end your cursed blight. The Master Sword flashed brightly, pushing Shadril back, along with the arrows wild and sky-shot. Hyrule's knife began to swirl with a mix of dark aura and the shade, the golden light of the Triforce. Never again to darken the sun. Be sealed away and given blood. Shadril screamed. Hyrule lowered his hands, the knife jerking down as if by invisible strings. He thrust his hands forward, and the knife turned, flying through the air. Twilight and Legend dove out of the way, but Shadril tried to avoid it. But like magic, the knife turned and buried itself in his chest. Shadril fell back, his hands grabbing at the knife's handle, but his hands were already dissolving. He struggled a bit longer, then fell back, clearly defeated. That didn't stop him from glaring at Hyrule and speaking through ragged breaths. You're a fool! A part of the goddesses! Hyrule pulled out his last magic potion and downed it, trying to ignore the looks from the others. Shadril paused. She doesn't care what happens to you. You would submit yourself to the torture? For her? Hyrule walked over, trying to hide the fact that he was about to fall over from exhaustion. He didn't think he did a good job with how many times he stumbled. Hyrule looked down at the dark blob. It's not for her. Shadril looked surprised. You may not remember, but I do, Hyrule whispered. And I'd rather be a pawn than let anyone else be hurt by you. Hyrule put his bleeding hand over the monster's chest, directly above the knife. He pulled at the magic in the dark. Seeping goo began to pour from the knife wound. It rose up slowly as the demon resisted, but the golden magic burned bright. The dark blood began to enter the wound in Hyrule's hand. Hyrule's hand instantly felt numb, and it took all of Hyrule's strength to not drop his arm. The numbness turned into a cold that slowly began to crawl through his body. Hyrule bit his lower lip and let out a gasp, dropping to his knees. His left hand dropped down to the knife hilt for support, and the dark magic was forced into Hyrule's blood with some encouragement from the golden power flowing from his right. The puddle faded until Hyrule was sitting with a knife stabbing into the ground that only held Hyrule's shadow, and little else. Hyrule dropped the knife, then rested his right hand over his bloody, numb with pain left. He pulled the last bit of magic from deep within and used the life spell to heal the gaping hole in his hand. He stared at his hands as his vision began to tunnel. He felt his body go limp and begin to fall over. Someone caught him. Someone very warm. Hyrule hadn't realized how cold he felt until now. The darkness enveloped him before he could begin to wonder why. End of Chapter 8.